In 1920, when the United States banned alcohol through Prohibition, Chicago became the stage where crime turned into empire, and ordinary men became infamous legends. Chicago in the early 20th century was a city of contrasts. Immigrants arrived in waves, searching for work in factories and stockyards. The city grew fast, but poverty and inequality grew just as quickly. Streets were crowded, housing was poor, and corruption was everywhere. Police officers were often underpaid, and politicians were willing to look the other way if money was offered. This environment created fertile ground for organized crime. Small gangs already existed, but Prohibition changed everything. When alcohol was outlawed in 1920, demand did not disappear. Instead, it grew stronger. People wanted to drink, and gangsters saw an opportunity. Bootlegging, the illegal production, transport, and sale of alcohol, was the foundation of gangster wealth during Prohibition. When the 18th Amendment took effect in January 1920, banning the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages, demand did not vanish. In fact, it grew stronger. Chicago, already a city of immigrants and working-class communities, had a deep cultural connection to alcohol. Beer halls, taverns, and saloons had been central to social life. Suddenly, they were outlawed. Chicago's geography made it perfect for smuggling. The city sat at the crossroads of America's railroads. Trains carried goods from coast to coast, and alcohol could be hidden among them. The Great Lakes provided waterways that connected Chicago to Canada, where alcohol remained legal. Trucks and highways offered routes from rural areas where secret distilleries operated. This web of connections allowed gangs to move liquor quickly and profitably. Criminal groups began to seize control of breweries and distilleries. Some were hidden in basements or warehouses. Others operated openly under the protection of bribed officials. Speakeasies, secret bars where alcohol was served, multiplied across the city. By the mid-1920s, Chicago had thousands of speakeasies, ranging from small backroom operations to lavish clubs with live music. At first, gangs were small and neighborhood-based. Irish, Italian, and Jewish groups each controlled their own areas. But Prohibition created enormous profits, and small gangs soon merged into larger organizations. These organizations fought for territory, bribed police officers, and built networks that stretched across the city. Violence became common. Shootings in the streets were reported almost daily. Bombings targeted rival businesses. Ordinary citizens lived with fear, but many also depended on gangsters for jobs, protection, or access to alcohol. One of the earliest powerful figures was Johnny Torrio, an Italian-American who had moved from New York to Chicago. Torrio was different from the typical street gangster. He understood business as much as crime. He believed gangs should act like corporations with structure, discipline, and profit sharing. Torrio avoided unnecessary fights, preferring negotiations and alliances. He built connections with politicians and police, ensuring protection for his operations. Torrio's vision transformed Chicago's underworld. He organized bootlegging routes, managed breweries, and created systems for distributing alcohol. He also recognized the importance of keeping violence controlled. Too much bloodshed attracted unwanted attention. Torrio's protege was Alphonse Al Capone, a young man from Brooklyn who arrived in Chicago in 1919. Capone had worked for Torrio in New York and followed him west when opportunities grew. Capone was ambitious, ruthless, and charismatic. He quickly rose through Torrio's ranks, proving himself capable of managing operations and handling rivals. Capone's personality made him stand out. He was bold in public, willing to flaunt wealth and power. He was also skilled at building loyalty among his men. By the mid-1920s, Capone had become Torrio's most trusted lieutenant. When Torrio retired after an assassination attempt in 1925, Capone inherited the empire. Capone's rise marked a turning point. Under Torrio, gangs had been organized but cautious. Under Capone, they became aggressive, expanding rapidly and dominating Chicago's underworld. By the mid-1920s, Capone was not only the most powerful gangster in Chicago, he was the most famous gangster in America. The biggest challenge during these years was control. Chicago was divided among gangs, each claiming neighborhoods. Irish gangs controlled the north side. Italian gangs dominated the south side. Smaller groups fought for scraps. Conflicts were constant. The North Side gang, led by Dean O'Banion, clashed with Torrio and Capone's South Side outfit. O'Banion ran a flower shop as a front for his bootlegging business. He was bold and often mocked rivals. In 1924, O'Banion was assassinated in his shop. His death marked the beginning of a bloody war between the North and South Side gangs. After O'Banion's murder, violence escalated. Torrio himself was targeted in 1925. He survived an assassination attempt but was badly shaken. Tired of constant danger, Torrio retired and handed control to Capone. Capone was younger, more aggressive, and less cautious. He expanded operations, controlled thousands of speakeasies, and earned millions of dollars. His empire included gambling, prostitution, and protection rackets. Capone became a symbol of gangster power. Interestingly, many Chicagoans did not see Capone only as a villain. Some admired him. He donated to charities, helped poor families, and presented himself as a man of the people. Newspapers covered his activities with fascination. He was both feared and respected. But behind the image, Capone's organization was brutal. Rival gangs were attacked, witnesses were silenced, police officers were bribed, judges were influenced. Chicago became a city where law seemed powerless. Al Capone's famous nickname, Scarface, came from a knife attack during his youth in Brooklyn. The scars on his face made the name stick, but Capone himself despised it. He preferred to be seen as stylish and sophisticated. Among his close friends, he was often called snorky, a slang term at the time meaning sharp or well-dressed. This detail shows how Capone cared deeply about his public image, even as he built his empire through crime. Gangsters in Chicago often hid their illegal operations behind legitimate businesses. Laundries, bakeries, and flower shops were common fronts. These businesses gave the appearance of respectability while concealing bootlegging, gambling, or extortion activities. For ordinary citizens, it was sometimes difficult to know which shops were truly legitimate and which were controlled by gangs. This blending of crime with everyday life made the gangster era feel inescapable. Violence during this period was not limited to battles between rival gangs. Innocent people were sometimes caught in the crossfire of shootings and bombings. Newspapers reported these tragedies, but arrests were rare. Witnesses were often too afraid to speak, and police officers were frequently bribed or intimidated. This lack of justice added to the atmosphere of fear that hung over Chicago. At its peak, Capone's empire was estimated to earn more than $100 million annually. This staggering figure reflected the scale of bootlegging, gambling, and other rackets under his control. The profits allowed Capone to live lavishly with expensive suits, cars, and homes. But the wealth also fueled corruption, as bribes flowed to officials who ensured his operations continued without interference. The gangster era in Chicago was not only about crime, it was about corruption. Politicians accepted bribes to ignore bootlegging. Police officers worked for gangs. Judges dismissed cases. This created controversy. Was Chicago a city run by its government or by its gangsters? This theme of corruption is central to understanding the era. Without cooperation from officials, gangs could not have grown so powerful. Prohibition laws were strict, but enforcement was weak. Citizens saw hypocrisy everywhere. By the mid-1920s, Capone's outfit controlled most of Chicago's South Side. The North Side Gang, now led by George "Bugs" Moran, continued to resist. Tension grew. Each side prepared for war. The stage was set for one of the most infamous events in gangster history, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929. But before that, Chicago would endure years of shootings, bombings, and fear. After Johnny Torrio stepped down, Al Capone took full control of the South Side outfit. His empire grew quickly, but so did resistance. The North Side Gang, led by George "Bugs" Moran, refused to surrender. Moran's men controlled territory rich with speakeasies and breweries. Capone wanted it. The rivalry between the outfit and the North Side Gang became one of the most violent in American history. Drive-by shootings, bombings, and assassinations filled the headlines. Ordinary citizens lived in fear, yet many were drawn to the drama. Newspapers sold thousands of copies by reporting every killing. Territory meant money. Whoever controlled the most speakeasies and breweries controlled the flow of alcohol. Capone's outfit had the South Side, but Moran's gang held the North Side. Neither wanted to compromise. Capone tried to negotiate at times, but Moran was stubborn. He hated Capone and often mocked him publicly. This personal hatred added fuel to the fire. Al Capone stood at the center of the conflict. As the leader of the outfit, he was determined to dominate Chicago's underworld. His empire stretched across the South Side, controlling breweries, speakeasies, and gambling dens. Capone's ambition was unmatched, and he believed that only total control could secure lasting power. His decisions often meant life or death for rivals, and his name became synonymous with both wealth and violence. Facing him was George "Bugs" Moran, the head of the North Side Gang. Moran was bold, defiant, and deeply opposed to Capone's growing influence. He refused to surrender territory and mocked Capone publicly, which fueled their rivalry. Moran's stubbornness and hatred of Capone made peace impossible. His leadership kept the North Side Gang alive, but it also drew them into constant battles that left Chicago's streets soaked in blood. Among Capone's most trusted men was Jack "Machine Gun" McGurn. Known for his skill with firearms, McGurn became infamous for his role in planning attacks against rivals. He was loyal to Capone and carried out orders with precision. McGurn's reputation as a ruthless enforcer added to the fear surrounding the outfit. His presence ensured that Capone's threats were never empty. Another key figure was Frank Nitti, Capone's lieutenant. Nitti managed operations and helped keep the empire running smoothly. He was less flamboyant than Capone, but just as determined to protect the outfit's interests. After Capone's downfall, Nitti would rise to greater prominence, proving that the organization was larger than any single man. Together, these men shaped the conflict that defined Chicago's gangster era. Each decision they made carried deadly consequences. Their rivalry turned the city into a battlefield where power was measured not only in money, but in lives lost. On the morning of February 14, 1929, the bitter rivalry between Al Capone's outfit and George "Bugs" Moran's North Side Gang reached its most violent peak. Moran's men were lured to a garage at 2122 North Clark Street, supposedly to receive a shipment of hijacked liquor. Instead, they walked into a trap. Inside the garage, 7 of Moran's associates were lined up against a wall. Suddenly, 4 men entered, 2 dressed in police uniforms and 2 in plain clothes. Believing it was a routine police raid, Moran's men complied without resistance. Within seconds, gunfire erupted. The attackers used Thompson submachine guns, spraying bullets across the room. When the shooting stopped, 6 men lay dead, and a 7th was fatally wounded. The victims included key members of Moran's gang: Peter Gussenberg, Frank Gussenberg, Adam Heyer, Albert Kochelik, James Clark, Reinhard Schwimmer, John May, and Albert Weinshank. Only Frank Gussenberg survived long enough to speak to police, but he refused to identify the shooters, saying simply, "Nobody shot me." The massacre stunned Chicago and the entire country. Newspapers published graphic photographs of the bodies sprawled across the garage floor. Citizens were horrified by the brutality and precision of the attack. For many Americans, this was the moment when gangster violence could no longer be ignored. The idea that men disguised as police officers carried out the killings added to the outrage. It suggested that gangsters had not only corrupted officials but were willing to impersonate them to carry out executions. Trust in law enforcement weakened further. Although Al Capone was never officially charged, suspicion immediately fell on him. The timing, the method, and the target all pointed to his outfit. Moran himself famously remarked, "Only Capone kills like that." Capone, however, had a strong alibi. He was in Florida at the time. This allowed him to deny involvement, but few believed he was innocent. Ironically, Moran escaped the massacre because he was late to the meeting. Seeing men he thought were police officers near the garage, he turned away before entering. That decision saved his life, but destroyed his gang. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre became the enduring symbol of Chicago's gangster era. It showed the extremes gangs were willing to reach to eliminate rivals. It was not a random shooting. It was a calculated strike meant to cripple Moran's organization once and for all. Capone's empire seemed untouchable, but the public reaction was different this time. Citizens who once admired his boldness now saw him as a ruthless killer. Politicians in Washington, embarrassed by Chicago's lawlessness, began pressing for stronger federal action. Fear became the defining theme of this period. Citizens feared walking the streets. Gangsters feared betrayal. Politicians feared exposure of their corruption. Capone's empire thrived on fear. His men enforced loyalty through intimidation. Rival gangs feared his reach. Yet fear also weakened him. The massacre made him too visible, too notorious. After the massacre, Capone was at the height of his power. He controlled most of Chicago's illegal alcohol trade. His wealth was unmatched, but federal agents were closing in. The next turning point would not come from rival gangs, but from the government itself. Capone's downfall would be built not on bullets, but on taxes. After the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Capone's outfit faced little serious competition. Bugs Moran's North Side gang was weakened, and smaller gangs either joined Capone or were destroyed. Capone controlled thousands of speakeasies, breweries, and gambling dens. His empire stretched across Chicago and beyond. Estimates suggest his organization earned tens of millions of dollars each year. Capone was not only feared, he was famous. Newspapers followed his every move. He wore tailored suits, smoked expensive cigars, and lived in luxury. To many, he symbolized the excesses of the Prohibition era. Al Capone wanted to be seen as more than a criminal. He understood the power of public opinion and worked to shape his image. During the Great Depression, when families struggled to afford food, Capone funded soup kitchens that served thousands of meals to the poor. He donated money to charities and offered assistance to those in need. These acts earned him a measure of public support. To some, he appeared as a man who cared for ordinary people, a figure who stood against hardship when the government seemed absent. But legitimacy was difficult to maintain. Behind the generosity was a brutal empire built on violence, bribery, and intimidation. Capone's men enforced loyalty through threats and killings. Rivals were eliminated, witnesses were silenced, and officials were bribed to look the other way. The kindness shown in public was overshadowed by the cruelty carried out in private. Capone's empire thrived because fear was stronger than goodwill. Capone was the face of the outfit, but the organization was much larger than one man. Several trusted lieutenants ensured that operations ran smoothly and profits continued to flow. Frank Nitti, known as the Enforcer, managed day-to-day operations and became one of Capone's most important deputies. Nitti was practical and ruthless, ensuring that orders were carried out and that the outfit's influence remained strong. After Capone's imprisonment, Nitti would rise to greater prominence, guiding the outfit through its next phase. Jack Guzik served as Capone's financial advisor. He was skilled at handling bribes and payoffs, making sure that politicians, police officers, and judges were kept loyal. Guzik's ability to manage money and corruption was vital to the outfit's survival. Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik, another trusted lieutenant, was responsible for maintaining political connections. His nickname came from his reputation for handing out bribes with ease. He ensured that the outfit had allies in government, which allowed them to operate with little interference. Tony Accardo was a rising figure during Capone's era. Though younger and less known at the time, Accardo would later become one of the most powerful leaders in the outfit's history. His quiet, careful style contrasted with Capone's flamboyance, but it allowed him to remain in power for decades. Local police were often powerless against Capone. Many were bribed, and others feared retaliation. But federal authorities began to take notice. The Treasury Department, led by Elliot Ness and his team known as the Untouchables, targeted Capone's operations. Ness focused on raiding breweries and disrupting supply lines. His team was called Untouchable because they refused bribes. At the same time, federal prosecutors searched for a way to convict Capone. Murder charges were difficult. Witnesses were too afraid to testify. But Capone had one weakness: taxes. Capone lived lavishly, but he never filed proper tax returns. Federal agents gathered evidence of his income through bank records, gambling profits, and witness testimony. In 1931, Capone was indicted for tax evasion. It was a surprising charge for such a notorious gangster, but it was effective. The government could prove he owed money. Capone's trial began in October 1931. He tried to bribe jurors, but the judge switched the jury pool at the last moment. Witnesses testified about his income. Capone's lawyers argued he was not responsible for the empire's profits, but the evidence was strong. He was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. This was the climax of his career. The man who had controlled Chicago was finally brought down, not by rival gangs, but by accountants and prosecutors. Al Capone's imprisonment in 1931 marked the beginning of the decline of Chicago's gangster era. For years, he had ruled the city with wealth, violence, and influence, but the conviction for tax evasion stripped him of his power. Citizens across the country celebrated the verdict. Newspapers declared that justice had finally been served. Yet many were surprised that it was not murder or racketeering that ended his reign, but unpaid taxes. The irony was striking. Capone had survived countless assassination attempts and avoided charges for dozens of killings, but he could not escape the reach of accountants and prosecutors. Although Capone was gone, his outfit did not collapse. Leadership passed to Frank Nitti, who kept operations running, and later to Tony Accardo, who guided the organization into new ventures. The golden age of Prohibition was ending, but organized crime adapted. Gambling, extortion, and labor racketeering replaced bootlegging as the outfit's main sources of income. Capone was first sent to Atlanta prison, but his influence there was too strong. Guards reported that he received special treatment, and his wealth allowed him privileges that ordinary inmates could not imagine. To break his power, authorities transferred him to Alcatraz in 1934, the newly built prison designed to hold America's most dangerous criminals. Life in Alcatraz was harsh. Capone's health began to decline due to untreated syphilis, which affected his mind as well as his body. Once feared as the most powerful gangster in America, he became mentally weakened and withdrawn. By the time he was released in 1939, he was no longer the man who had ruled Chicago. He spent his final years quietly in Florida, far removed from the empire he once commanded. The role of Elliot Ness in his team, known as the Untouchables, was important in disrupting Capone's operations. They raided breweries, seized trucks, and made headlines for refusing bribes. Yet historians note that these raids alone did not bring Capone down. The decisive factor was the tax evasion charges, carefully built by federal prosecutors who tracked his income and spending. Capone's trial was one of the first major victories for federal law enforcement against organized crime. It showed that gangsters could be defeated not only with guns, but with law and persistence. The conviction set a precedent for future cases, proving that even the most powerful criminals were not beyond the reach of justice. For years, Capone seemed untouchable. He bribed officials, silenced rivals, and lived openly as a gangster. But justice came in an unexpected form. This shows the controversy of the era. Laws against alcohol created crime, but lax laws ended it. Capone's fall did not end organized crime in Chicago. His outfit survived, adapting to new opportunities. Gambling, extortion, and labor racketeering replaced bootlegging. Capone's conviction was celebrated across the nation. Newspapers declared that justice had finally caught up with the most notorious gangster in America. But in Chicago, the outfit did not collapse. Capone had built a structure strong enough to survive without him. His lieutenants, Frank Nitti, Jake Guzik, and others stepped in to manage operations. The empire shifted, but it did not disappear. Frank Nitti, known as the Enforcer, became the new leader. Unlike Capone, Nitti kept a lower profile. He avoided the spotlight and focused on maintaining profits. Nitti expanded into new areas. With Prohibition ending in 1933, bootlegging was no longer profitable. The outfit turned to gambling, extortion, and labor racketeering. They infiltrated unions, controlled strikes, and demanded payments from businesses. This shift showed the adaptability of organized crime. When one source of income dried up, another was found. When Al Capone was sent to prison in 1931, many believed the outfit would collapse. Public attention was high, and federal authorities were more determined than ever to dismantle organized crime in Chicago. Yet the outfit proved resilient. Its leaders understood that survival depended on avoiding the flamboyance that had made Capone such a visible target. Frank Nitti stepped into the role of leader. Known as the Enforcer, Nitti was practical and cautious. He avoided the public spotlight and focused on keeping the outfit profitable. His main strategy was labor racketeering. By infiltrating unions, the outfit gained control over strikes and contracts, forcing businesses to pay for protection. This gave them steady income and influence without the constant risk of Prohibition-era raids. Still, violence did not disappear. Rival gangs tried to take advantage of Capone's absence, hoping to reclaim territory. But the outfit remained strong, using intimidation and corruption to maintain control. Police officers and politicians continued to accept bribes, ensuring that the organization operated with little interference. Frank Nitti was the first to guide the outfit after Capone. His leadership style was quieter, but his methods were ruthless. He kept the organization stable during a time of transition, proving that the outfit was larger than any single man. Paul Ricca, known as the Waiter, rose to prominence in the 1940s. Ricca was strategic and disciplined, shaping the outfit into a more sophisticated organization. His influence extended beyond Chicago, and he became one of the most important figures in the outfit's history. Tony Accardo was a rising figure during this period. Unlike Capone, Accardo avoided publicity and lived modestly. His careful approach allowed him to remain in power for decades, guiding the outfit through changes in law enforcement and society. Under his leadership, the outfit expanded into gambling operations in Las Vegas and maintained influence across the country. Jake Guzik continued to manage finances and political connections. His skill in handling bribes and payoffs ensured that the outfit had allies in government. Guzik's role was crucial in keeping the organization safe from prosecution and maintaining its grip on Chicago. These men ensured the outfit's survival long after Capone's downfall. Each played a role in adapting the organization to new realities. Prohibition was over, but crime did not end. The outfit shifted its focus, proving that organized crime could evolve with the times. Chicago remained under the shadow of the outfit. Citizens hoped Capone's imprisonment would bring peace, but corruption and intimidation continued. The gangster era had changed the city permanently, and its legacy lived on through the leaders who followed. In 1933, Prohibition was repealed. Alcohol was legal again. For gangsters, this was both a loss and an opportunity. Bootlegging profits vanished, but new ventures opened. The outfit moved into gambling, both legal and illegal. They controlled casinos, betting operations, and horse racing. They also expanded into extortion, demanding payments from businesses in exchange for protection. This gave them steady income and influence without the constant risk of Prohibition-era raids. Labor unions became a major target. The outfit infiltrated unions, controlled strikes, and used them to gain power. This created controversy. Was organized crime now part of legitimate labor movements? Al Capone's imprisonment in 1931 was celebrated as a victory for justice, but for Chicago, the shadow of organized crime did not fade. Citizens had hoped that removing the city's most notorious gangster would bring peace, yet corruption continued to thrive. Politicians still accepted bribes, and police officers often looked the other way. The outfit, though quieter under new leadership, remained powerful and deeply entrenched in the city's daily life. The gangster era had changed Chicago permanently. Trust in government was weakened, and many residents believed that officials were either powerless or complicit. Fear lingered in neighborhoods where gangsters controlled businesses and unions. Ordinary people understood that crime had not disappeared, it had simply changed form. Bootlegging gave way to gambling, extortion, and labor racketeering, but the system of intimidation and corruption remained intact. Chicago's reputation suffered. Across the nation, the city became synonymous with gangster violence and corruption. This image would endure for decades, shaping how outsiders viewed Chicago and how its citizens understood their own history. Frank Nitti, who succeeded Capone, was known for his ruthless efficiency but carried a deep fear of prison. In 1943, when he faced federal charges for extortion involving Hollywood film unions, Nitti chose suicide rather than serve time. His death revealed the personal toll that leadership in the outfit could take, even on hardened men. Tony Accardo, who rose after Nitti, lived in stark contrast to Capone's flamboyance. He avoided publicity, kept a low profile, and managed to stay out of prison for most of his life. His quiet leadership allowed the outfit to survive for decades, adapting to new opportunities while avoiding the mistakes that had made Capone a target. The outfit's influence extended far beyond Chicago. By the mid-20th century, they had invested in Las Vegas casinos, shaping the city's gambling industry. They also infiltrated Hollywood unions, using intimidation to control film production and secure profits. This expansion showed that organized crime was not confined to Chicago, it was a national force. Many businesses in Chicago continued to pay protection money well into the mid-20th century. Store owners, tavern operators, and labor leaders often had no choice. Paying the outfit meant safety. Refusing meant threats, violence, or destruction. This system kept the organization profitable and ensured that fear remained a constant presence in everyday life. Capone's fall did not end organized crime. It proved that the system was bigger than one man. The outfit survived, adapted, and thrived. This continuity shows the controversy of the era. Was Chicago truly free from gangster rule, or had crime simply gone underground? By the late 1930s, the outfit was stronger than ever. Capone was gone, but his legacy lived on. New leaders kept the empire alive, and Chicago remained a city where crime and politics were deeply connected.